They laughed at me before the judge even sat down, not loudly at first, just the kind of laughter people think doesn't count. A smirk here, a whisper there. One attorney leaned toward another, and I caught the words anyway. She came alone. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I stood at the defense table and kept my hands folded over the strap of my old leather bag so no one would see the tremor in them. At 72, people notice what they expect to notice. The silver hair, the careful steps, the plain navy coat that had gone out of fashion 20 years ago. They saw an old woman with no lawyer, no family, no one beside her, and in their minds, that told them everything. They were wrong. Have you ever walked into a room and felt people decide your story before you opened your mouth? That was the room. Heavy oak benches, fluorescent lights too cold for human skin, polished floors reflecting shoes that cost more than my monthly groceries, the kind of courtroom where power sat comfortably and doubt was treated like weakness. At the prosecution table, Calvin Rourke, 45, wore confidence like a tailored suit, sharp tie, white teeth, the expression of a man already rehearsing his victory. Beside him, his young associate tried not to stare at me too long, but she kept looking back as if she couldn't decide whether I was pathetic or dangerous. Then the bailiff called for silence. Judge Elias Werner, 58, entered with the kind of presence that made people sit straighter without thinking. He took his seat. I glanced at the docket and then at me. His eyes lingered half a second longer than most, not enough for anyone else to notice, enough for me. Ms. Kovac, he said, you understand the charges before this court? I do. No lawyer, no hesitation. That changed the room in a way no one admitted. Rourke stood and began smoothly, like he'd been waiting all week for this performance. Fraud, false identities, illegal property acquisitions, anonymous transfers, missing money. He laid it out piece by piece, and each word made the spectators lean in a little farther. To them I was either a fool or a thief, but I kept watching the judge, because on his bench sat a thick manila file, mine, still unopened. Then a clerk hurried up and placed one more paper on top of it. Judge Werner frowned, pulled the file closer and opened it. His hand stopped on the first page, his face drained, and when he finally looked up at me, the whole courtroom went silent before he even spoke. Ms. Kovac, he said slowly, who are you? Why would a judge react like that to someone like me? Let me take you back a few hours, before the laughter settled in, before the question that silenced the room. That morning, I walked into the courthouse, alone, no escort, no attorney, just me and the same leather bag I'd carried for years. The security guard barely looked up when I passed through. To him, I was just another elderly woman with paperwork and a problem. That was the first mistake. Inside, everything moved quickly. People with purpose, shoes clicking, voices low but urgent. And in the middle of it all, I took a seat and waited. Not nervously, not impatiently, deliberately. Across the hall, I saw Calvin Rourke before he ever saw me. He was laughing, flipping through a file like it was routine, like I was routine. Open and shut, he told his associate. These cases always are. Always. That word stayed with me, because nothing about this case was always. 3 properties, they said, acquired under different names, each identity clean on the surface, but just messy enough underneath to raise suspicion. And then the transfers, donations to organizations that no longer existed, vanished. That's what bothered them most, not what I took, but where it went. When intake called my name, the clerk didn't even hide her confusion. "You're representing yourself?" she asked. "I am." She hesitated. "You understand the risk?" I looked directly at her. "Better than most." She didn't ask another question. I'm back in the courtroom as Rourke began laying out his version of my life. I listened carefully, not to defend myself, not yet, but to measure him, every claim, every date, every assumption he presented as fact. And each time he spoke, I wrote something down, slowly, precisely. That's when he made his first mistake. He held up a document. "This signature," he said confidently, "was forged to complete an illegal transfer." I looked at it briefly, then I spoke. "That signature was witnessed," I said, my voice steady, "by a federal officer." The room shifted, not dramatically, just enough. Rourke smiled like I'd proven his point. "There's no record of that." I met his eyes. "There wouldn't be." A few people laughed again. Softer this time. Uncertain. But the judge didn't laugh. He was watching me now. Not casually. And not dismissively, carefully, like something wasn't adding up. And then I saw it. The moment his attention drifted back to that unopened file, his hand moved toward it again. This time he didn't hesitate, and something told me, once he started reading, this would no longer be their case. What could possibly be in that file? That makes a judge forget the courtroom in front of him. I watched his fingers as he opened it fully this time. Not casually, not out of routine, carefully. You can tell a lot about a person by how they handle information. Judge Werner wasn't just reading, he was processing. Each page slowed him down more than the last, and the longer he looked, the quieter the room became. Rourke kept talking, of course. Men like him don't stop just because something feels off. "Your Honor," he continued, pacing slightly. The defendant constructed multiple identities to conceal property acquisitions. Mr. Rourke?" The interruption was soft, but it cut clean through him. He stopped mid-sentence, clearly not used to being stopped at all. "Yes, Your Honor." Pause. Just that. Pause. The word lingered in the air, like something heavier than it should have been. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I simply watched as the judge turned another page. There it was, the photograph. I hadn't seen it in years, but I knew exactly which one it was. Me, decades younger, standing beside people whose faces had been blacked out so thoroughly they looked like shadows instead of humans. Timestamp, 1998. Location, redacted. Purpose, never written. Judge Werner leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening. Then he reached the next page. That was the one that mattered. A short memo, barely half a page, but enough. His eyes slowed. His breathing changed, subtle but noticeable if you were looking for it. And I was. "Miss Kovach," he said finally, his voice lower now. "Why is there a federal restriction attached to your record?" There it was. Not if. Not whether. Why? The room shifted in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was tension. I stepped forward just slightly. Enough for him to know I heard him. Enough for everyone else to feel it. "I believe," I said calmly, "that question answers itself." Rourke let out a small disbelieving laugh. Your Honour, with respect, this is clearly an attempt to— It is not, the judge said sharply. That shut him down. Completely. For the first time since this started, Rourke didn't have control of the room. The judge signalled to the clerk. A quiet exchange. Instructions whispered too low for anyone else to hear. But I knew what was happening. He wasn't guessing anymore. He was verifying. And when the clerk picked up the phone and dialed, not a local number, not even a state office, but something higher, I felt the shift settle in for good. Rourke saw it too. You can't be serious, he muttered. Oh, but he was, because whatever was in that file wasn't supposed to be here. And when the judge got his answer, this entire case was about to collapse in a way no one in that room was prepared for. What happens when the truth isn't just hidden, but buried on purpose? The judge came back different, not visibly shaken. No, a man like Elias Werner doesn't unravel in public. But something in him had shifted. The way he sat, the way his eyes moved, not across the room, but directly to me, measured, careful. Court is back in session. His voice carried a weight it didn't have before. I felt every person in that room lean into the silence that followed. Miss Kovacs, he said, slower now, choosing each word like it mattered more than usual. Is it correct that the properties referenced in this case were part of operational activity? There it was. Not accusation, recognition. A ripple went through the courtroom. Confusion first, then disbelief. Operational what? Rourke blurted, unable to stop himself. I exhaled quietly. This was the moment everything stopped pretending. For years, I said, my voice steady, those identities were used to move assets that couldn't be traced through official federal channels. No one interrupted me now. Not even him. The properties weren't personal, I continued. They were transit points, temporary holdings, the organizations you're calling charities. I paused just long enough to let the word settle. Were placeholders. The word hung in the air like something fragile. Placeholders. Judge Verne nodded once, almost imperceptibly. It was enough. Rourke shook his head, stepping forward again, but his confidence was gone now, replaced by something sharper. Panic, maybe. This is absurd, he said. There's no documentation, no admissible proof. There wouldn't be, the judge said quietly. He didn't even look at him when he said it. He was looking at me, and now the room understood. At least they understood enough. What they thought was fraud wasn't theft. It was concealment. Sanctioned. Controlled. Invisible. And I had been part of it. Not a victim, not a criminal, something in between. Rourke stepped back slowly, like the ground under him had shifted without warning. This changes nothing, he insisted, but his voice didn't carry any more. It didn't need to, because the real question had finally surfaced. Not what I did, but why I was here. I answered before anyone could ask. I stopped. I said simply. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Stopped what? Cooperating. That word hit harder than anything else. Silence followed. Heavy. Immediate. They asked for one more transfer. I continued. One I wouldn't make. And this case? The judge asked. I held his gaze. This is what happens when you refuse. The implication spread slowly, but completely. This wasn't a prosecution. It was a message. And now the judge had a choice to make. Bury it or expose it. What does a judge do? when the case in front of him was never meant to exist. The silence in that courtroom wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded. Every person sitting there felt it, whether they understood it or not. Judge Verne folded his hands, then unfolded them again. A small movement, but it told me everything. He was thinking beyond the room now, beyond the case, beyond us. This court, he began slowly, cannot proceed under compromised authority. Rourke straightened. Your Honour. No, the judge cut in, not raising his voice, but ending the argument before it began. You've presented a case built on incomplete records, restricted information, and jurisdictional overreach. Each word landed precisely, carefully chosen, legally airtight, and he wasn't exposing everything, but he was exposing enough. Logical payoff. The charges against Miss Maribel Kovacs are dismissed, he said firmly. There it was. Not delayed, not deferred, dismissed. He continued just long enough to close every door that had been opened against me. Any further action regarding this matter requires federal authorization beyond the scope of this court. Translation. This case should never have been filed, and now it couldn't continue. Emotional payoff. I didn't react immediately. No smile, no visible relief, just a slow exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months, maybe longer. My hands trembled again, but not from fear this time. Something quieter, something heavier. Release. Across the room, Rourke sat frozen, his earlier confidence completely gone. His associate avoided looking at anyone at all. The spectators, those same people who had laughed, now whispered behind their hands, careful, uncertain. No one was laughing any more. Consequence. Payoff. The aftermath came quickly. Within a week an internal review was launched. Quietly, but thoroughly. Questions were asked about how a federally restricted file made it into a public courtroom. Rourke's firm faced scrutiny for pursuing charges without proper clearance, not criminal, but enough to stain reputations and stall careers. The charities tied to my case were reclassified, their records sealed under federal authority once again. As for me, 2 men came to see me, not in suits like lawyers, not like agents either. Something in between. They made an offer, temporary reinstatement, one final operation. Finish what I had refused. I listened. Then I gave them the same answer I had before. No. This time they didn't argue, because now I wasn't invisible anymore. Final resolution moment. A few weeks later, I stood in a small office signing papers with my real name, no aliases, no false identities, just Maribel Kovacs. The house wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It was mine, legitimately, openly, finally. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, not lighter, not freer, just mine. No courtroom, no watchers, no file thick enough to define me. Behind me, systems adjusted, quietly, carefully. But for the first time in years, I wasn't part of them, and they couldn't pretend I didn't exist.